So just a administrative thing that so I looked on the calendar. We have another 9 shiurim through the rest of the year. I've decided that I will teach Hanukkah also, so we can go straight through basically tonight and then 9 more shiurim. I see that in January I'm on the road. I don't think I'll be able to do it. So that will be the last class will be the end of December, which means we have a lot to cover. I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to skip. Obviously, there's genealogy. I mean, we'll be able to cover most of it. The genealogies are obviously going to be cut, and probably a few psukim from the flood story itself. And what's much more interesting is what happens at the end of the flood. Um, so that is um, still to come. That's sort of just letting you know where we're going through the end of the year. Okay. So we are. I don't know if anybody had enjoyed Parshat Shavua last week. Those of you who are with me last week, anyways, or looked over. I mean, it was fun to see what we're learning and seeing what we're going to learn, which is what made me think, wow, there's a lot of stuff here, and we're not going to be able to cover it all. I started dividing it into different shiurim that I want to give. So yeah. Anyway, so here we're still in the very beginning of the parsha. We got up to Pasuk Yud Gimel last week. We're now on Pasuk Yud Daled, and this is God's speech to Noah as to what he's planning to do. To be clear, right, how this is broken down. The first part, the first three psukim in the parsha is the narrative voice. God is we see what that Noach's a good guy. That God likes Noach, but he doesn't like the rest of the world. He's going to destroy them. Pasuk Yud Gimel, so is the beginning of God's speech to Noach. Okay, and he says, what's going to be? It's because of the Hamas, which we said is armed theft, violent theft, or theft with a threat of violence. And that's even though there's other things going on. Rashi pointed out, quoting Chazal, that seems to be, for whatever reason, problematic. And we spoke about that last week. Okay, so let's look at Pasuk Yudalid. Aseh lecha tevat atzei gofer kinim ta'aseh et ha'teva v'chafarta ota mibayit u'mechutz ba'kofer. Okay, so God says to Noah, make for yourself. It's interesting, the word that's used, teva, right? Teva is basically a square container. It's also a word, right? Because a word is a rectangular shape, right? Right. If you look at the Hebrew letters, right, each one is a box, right? So there's things that stick out of the box, like the lamed or the kuf. But by and large, most words are rectangles. So that is how this is described. The only other time we have this word used for a boat, for a water, a vehicle that goes on the water is with Moshe's what do you call it? What do you call that? Not cradle. What's the word?
Like
Not
a
bassinet.
bassinet, maybe?
Yeah, but it
That's
floats. Basket. What? Sorry, doesn't matter. We all know what we're talking about. Um, anyway, so that's what God wants him to make of a type of wood called gopher, right? Not like most terms that are not common animals or plants. They tend to get to be unclear, right? Like Eight Zayit, we all know what Eight Zayit is because it's very common, right? But when you get into things that are less common, so the identity becomes less clear. In any case, God continues and says to him, make it kinim. Now, kinim is, as Rashi, if anybody take a look in Rashi, it's probably better than looking in the dictionary. Kinim is compartments, okay? And the place we're most familiar with that from, both in Tanakh and in Halach and Gemara, is Ken Sipor, which is a bird's nest, right? The halacha, the law of not taking the mother bird without shooing away or the other way around, not taking the babies or the eggs without showing the mother. So she is described as sitting over her ken. Okay, but ken we see here is compartments. So Noach is told to make the teva compartments, right? Because in theory it could have been one big room, right? God doesn't want that. Kafarta, coat it or tar it really inwards and outwards with tar. Okay. Now bechofer, I'm not going to get into it, but just the comparison that's made is actually of Tevat Moshe, where over there the kofer is only on the outside, not on the inside, right? Also, Yosef has experience with kofer. It's also both Moshe and Yosef are protected from the scent of the tar, but we're not going to go over there. What I do want to look at in this pasuk is the first couple Rashis. So Rashi points out, and there's basically no way to know this from the psukim, at least from these psukim here. Rashi tells us harbe revach v'hatzala lefanav, right? So that means a lot of time, basically, a lot of space is in front of him. What Rashi means by that is there's a lot of time before the flood's going to happen, right? According to our tradition, it's 120 years still to go, right? So the obvious question is, which Rashi sort of speaks out, is why so early? Why so much time, right? Actually, he does speak it out next words. Lame tricho v'vinyan zeh. So why did he make him toil in this building, right? So it's interesting because the tiracha in terms of the effort. Oh, hi, we have a guest. So not really a guest, but good to see you, Leah. What the tiracha in terms of the building is something Noach has to build regardless. That's not what Rashi's addressing. Rashi's addressing the amount of time. In other words, like any of us, if you can do it later, why do it now? I mean, I don't know about you. Maybe you guys are better than me, but many of us, when you can push something off, you have a deadline, and you can make the deadline. And I'm not talking about people who slouch and try to get away without the deadline. I remember one of my first teaching experiences was teaching at a Jewish college. Actually, sort of gives it away, but not too many of them. But where everybody tried to convince me to let them go past the deadline. And having gone to a regular college, I just wasn't used to that sort of culture. So it was really weird. But I didn't let them. But regardless, it was a sort of culture clash. But that's not Rashi's question. Rashi's question is, assuming, as we'll see the very last pasuk, that Noach is going to listen to God, right? Noach, after all, is a perfect tzaddik. He's going to listen to God. So why make him start so early? If it can be done later, why does he need to worry about it now? So Rashi's answer is Kedei shira'u anshe dor hamabul osek ba kuf kaf shana v'sholin oto ma zot lecha v'omer lehem atid HaKadosh Baruch Hu la'avi mabul la'olam ulai yashuvu. So the answer is that the 120 years were that people should see him doing this, right? It's a big spectacle. Ramban deals with that. We'll speak about that soon. And he would tell them that God is going to bring the world to an end with a flood, perhaps they would do tshuva. Okay, so why 120 years? We saw that in terms of God's in Parshat Bereshit, at the end of Parshat Bereshit, that God was going to give 120 years. Right? It's an interesting number. We know it's the number of Moshe's lifespan. Um, it's some sort of a complete generation in terms of not these generations, but in terms of standard generations. So Hashem is really giving them the best possible shot to do tshuva. He makes it obvious. Noach, presumably as a ish tzaddik tamim, would probably have a great deal of credibility, right? He's doing something that nobody else is doing in general, but they know him as straight, as someone who's honest and doesn't lie. So he's really giving them the best possible shot to do tshuva. That's Rashi's answer. Rashi, like I said, Rashi doesn't really answer why 120 as opposed to any other number, but I might have mentioned before the Rambam's famous answer to that is if it was a different number, you'd ask me why that number. Obviously, there are other commentators who think numbers are very significant, like the Maharal. Okay, Atze Gofer, what's Rashi's question? He says, Kach Shemo, and then he asks the question. What's the question? So Rashi says, Lama minze, why from this type of wood? But I think that the question from a textual perspective is slightly different. Anybody want to rephrase the question in such a way as to create a classical Rashi question here?
Why does it matter which type of wood?
Yeah, good. Who said that?
Ita.
Okay, Ita. Okay, you're off my screen. But okay. Still off my screen. What happened to you? Are you?
I'm sitting in the back seat.
Oh, there you are. Okay, you're yeah, I'm used to being in the front seat, right? So okay, yeah. So exactly. Very good, Ita. Yeah. So the question is why does it matter, right? Again, God is not trying to make trouble for Noah. Take any wood you want, right? Why should he dictate what type of wood? So before we go into Rashi's answer, what else could you answer besides what Rashi's going to say? Of course, you have to know what Rashi's going to say. Oh, yeah, good. Yefeh. Who said that? Zelda, right? Yeah, Zelda, that was you?
Yeah.
Maybe. Okay, excellent. Yeah, so in other words, granted, Noach may have personal preferences in how to do this, but no matter how good a builder he might be, he's not as good a builder, I mean, he's not as knowledgeable as God is, right? God is more knowledgeable than anyone about anything. So yeah, it could be purely functional, right? I've seen people say that it's a lightweight. Maybe that's good. Maybe, it's, I guess in terms of floating, it's obviously a good thing. In terms of ease to work, to carry, that's also helpful. Barrage is something different. He says, Al Shem Gofrit, Shenigzar Alehem Lamchot Bo, Limachot Bo. Right? So Rashi says, no, it's a reminder of the Gafrit, which is what do you call that? That comes down, brimstone that comes down from the sky, right? That God is going to rain down upon them. So it's sort of an allusion with an A, right? An illusion that people should, when they ask and they see using, according to Rashi, an unusual wood, right? Why using that wood? So presumably Noach's answer is, I don't know. But the point is that they would, I mean, I don't know, but God told me to do this, and that would make them try to seek and understand what it would be. That's one way to look at it. Another way is simply for the reader, right? God is bringing poetry and additional meaning into the whole construction of the scene. Okay. Any questions about this pasuk before we go on? No. זה אשר תעשה אותה 300 אמה, אורך התיבה, 50 אמה רוחבה ו30 אמה קומתה. So we have the dimensions. He's telling them exactly how big to make it. Again, we'll see more about that in the Ramban coming up. He says this is how you should make it: 300 amma. An amma is about 1.5 feet, okay, or half a meter, depending on what system you're more comfortable with, right? So 300 amma, which is the length, is about 150 meters. Okay, so it's big, but not gigantic by any stretch of the imagination. That's the longest dimension. It's 50 amma across and 30 amma tall. Okay. Now, I just gave you a dimension. Some Mefarshim challenge that. And then you have to know something about the word amma. And actually, there's another place in Chumash where this comes up, this issue of amma. Anybody have any idea what I'm referring to in terms of how to define an amma? Yeah, good. So that's a Katja pointing to her forearm. Excellent. Okay, so that's what nama is literally, just like in English, right? A foot. You don't have to put your foot up on the screen. A foot is a foot, right? So same idea. You know, the earliest measurements, I don't know in all cultures, but certainly in many, probably presumably most cultures, were designed based on what you had at hand, no pun intended, right? You had your hands and your feet and your legs and your arms. So it's the best way of coming up with measurements. But there's one real problem with such measurements. What's the problem? This is what I'm getting to. What's the problem with such measurements?
Not standardized?
Good, perfect, right? And it's when we talk about not standardized, we're talking about tremendous discrepancies, right? You have a guy who's, you know, even if we're just dealing with adults, right? You have a midget or just a short guy who's 5 feet, right? And another guy who's, 7 feet, right? And their feet are going to correspond in terms of that. So there's a big difference over there. So there's a possibility that when it's talking about amot here, it's talking about the amot of very large people. Some suggest that. We'll see. I mean, the obvious reason to suggest that is as the Ramban points out, the ark seems awfully small for what it's meant to do, right? So it's big, but in terms of what it's meant to do, it's doesn't seem to fit the purpose. So the people try different ways. We'll when we get to the Ramban, we'll tackle it. Okay, pasuk ted zayin. Soar tasel teva vel amat chalena milamala ufetach hateva betzida tasim tachtiim shniim ushlishim taasea. Okay, so I'm not translating the word sohar. Anybody who's prepared or just familiar with it knows that it's not obvious what it means. So make it sohar for the ark and finish it, right? Meaning shape it taper it. That's the English word. Taper it. Oh, everybody knows what tapering means? Like to come like this, right? To take something straight, and make it go like this. So taper it up to 1 amma, right? So the actual rooftop is 1 amma, even though we said it's right, it's 50 by 300, but presumably it tapers the long way, not the short way. It doesn't say. It could, in theory, be the other way, but I assume, and I think I have never seen a depiction where it tapers horizontally rather than vertically. But in any case, that's what he's told to do. Make an opening for the teva on its side. Place, or petach teva b'tzidat tasim, right? Place an opening for the teva on its side. Bottom, second, and third make it, right? Bottom, second, and third is referring to kinim, right? It's referring to these chambers again, okay? I mean, ultimately, it's really floors, right? So Rashi tells us what each floor is for. If you want to take a quick look, right? It's fairly well known, but it's worth just for your general knowledge. Says Rashi, Tachtim Shnim Shlishim, Gimel Aliyot Zal Agav Zo, the 3 stories, Elyonim LaAdam, the top is just for people, which, by the way, is a lot of room for a small group compared to the animals. Emtsaim L'Mador, and the second one is for dwelling, meaning for the dwelling of the animals. Tachtiim lezevel. And the third one is for waste products. Yeah, so that's, in any case, that's what the teva is to be. But I wanted to focus a little bit on the first Rashi. Okay, so Rashi, take a look at Zohar, right? It says, Yesh omrim chalon, yesh omrim even tova, hameira lehem. So some say it is a window, and some say it is a precious jewel that lights up for them. Okay, so I think everybody agrees that Sohar is a word that has to do with light, right? We'll see in the Chizkuni and the Even Ezra, which I didn't assign, 2 possibilities as what its root might be, or related word. But that would seem to be the function of this thing, as Rashi says, to give them light in what would be a pretty dark place. Even if they had one window, right, it's still pretty dark, right? A window, by the way, is like a petach, meaning it's there's no glass windows as far as I am aware. You're talking about wood that you remove, just like the door is wood that you remove. And just like the door is on the side, right, so that rain will not fall in any serious way. So too, presumably the Zohar, if it's a window, it's on its side. So the question is why? Well, it's a problem. To say Tsar as a window is a problem. Why is it a problem? From a textual perspective.
Water will get in.
Yeah, but that might be the same with the petach, right? That's what I was saying before. It's not anymore. It seems to be built in such a way that doesn't seem to be a major issue. So if it's a chalon, what should the text say? Chalon, right? And moreover, it says it later on, right? When we're going to see that the Noach sends the raven out, he sends her through, or through him actually, right? He sends him through the chalon. That's the word that's used. Okay, so we know that there is a chalon in the boat. Now, on the one hand, that sort of strengthens the possibility that it's a chalon because there's no other instruction to build a chalon. On the other hand, why doesn't it call it a chalon, right? So that's sort of the issue. There's beautiful chiskuni. Normally, I really dislike when people try to say everybody's right when there's a machloket and someone comes along and says they don't disagree. They're all right. So usually I hate that approach, but in this case I think it's very well done. I assume no one has the chiskuni. Um, you will find it in the Merkaz Arav Torat Chaim, which is a good Mikra Gedola to have if you have the money. It's also on Sfaria, so you don't have to have any money. You can just go online and look it up, which is always a good resource, right? As is Ala Torah, right? So there are places to find these sources if you don't own them yourselves. Okay, so it says the Chizkuni. I'm going to read it inside. I'll read it a little slower because I assume no one has it in front of them. Hu achalon shepatach Noach shalach haorev v'hayona. So the Chizkuni starts by saying, yeah, it is that window. It's that same window that Noach sent the birds through at the end of the story. Ubeot she'asatum natan sham even tova. But when it was closed, right, because of the rain, so he put a big jewel in its place, lahir lehem bifnim, to make light for them inside, right? Meaning the Chizkuni is saying as follows. It's just like houses, right? When it's day, what do? You open the window. When it's night, what do? You turn on the lights. So the Chizkuni is saying that the Tzohar here is really the source of light. And it's not a single thing, right? In other words, a way to translate it would be the light. And sometimes it's one form of light and sometimes another form of light. And he says, and according to that, both opinions are in agreement. Right? Then he brings both agreement, both sides of the argument. He says, "Ki lefi nireh ve'edut hakatuv sham chayalon," because he says, based on what appears to be the case, as well as the fact that Torah says it, right? It appears there was a window over there. Lefi pshuto tzohar taseh l'teva lashon yitzhar, right? He says that. However, the word Sohar doesn't sound like window, sounds like it's something else. So he derives it from the word Yitzhar. I don't know if anybody knows that word. It's a word for Shemen. For Shemen. So what does Shemen have to do with it? Shemen is the source of light, right? Candles and right in the ancient cultures, even today it's used, but that was the main source of light, not electricity, but rather oil. The Even Ezra connects it to a simpler connection, talks about Sahorayim, right? Sahorayim, which is afternoon. Why is it called Sahorayim? Well, for the same reason that Sohar is called Sohar, that it's the time of light. Okay. Tov. Okay, so that is Tet Zayin, the famous Sohar. And Pasuk Yud Zayin, V'ani hineni mevi et hamabul mayim al haaretz l'shachet kol basar asher bo'u chayim mitachat hashamayim kol asher ba'atz yigva. Okay, so behold, I will bring the flood of water upon the earth to destroy all flesh that has living spirit in it from under the heavens. Everything that is in the earth will be killed, essentially, will be terminated. That's a better word for it here. Okay, I don't think I had you look at anything. Oh, yeah. Did I have you look at Rashi and Zion? No. Okay. So, all right, so we'll just go on. Yud Chet, unless there's a question, comment. No? Okay. Yud Chet. Vakimoti et briti itach uvata el ateva ata uvanecha ve'ishtecha uneshev vanecha itach. Okay, so he says, and I'm going to establish the my covenant with you, right? Which is interesting because we've never heard about a covenant before, which is something the Farshim address. Uvata, and you'll come to the ark, you and your sons and your wife and the wives of your sons with you. Okay. So the first thing is everybody asks, like I said, what brit, right? What is the covenant? Okay, and there are a whole bunch of answers because it's really not clear what the covenant is. So I ask you to look at Rashi. Rashi says, Brit hayat sarich ala perot shelo yirkavu ve'yafshu v'shelo yarguhu rashaim shebedor. So there are two things that you need to promise from God. Number one, that the food that he would take in, right, the fruits, would not rot and spoil, and that the really bad people in the generation wouldn't kill him, right, first before he could get on the ark, right? It's interesting. I mean, we there's no scene of pandemonium when the Mabul starts, but we can only imagine that there might have been people who would be very upset and would try to break in on the ark. In any case, that's Rashi's the breed is, as it says the breed that the Orach Chaim, for example, speaks about a breed that this is not going to happen again, right? Which is actually the breed that God makes with the rainbow later on at the end of the story. Says the Orach Chaim, even before that, even before the flood, God immediately insinuates that that's what is going to happen, that there's a brit, that this is a one-time thing. I don't want you to think this is going to happen over and over again. Similarly to what the Ramban says about the concern of Bnei Yisrael after the first generation can't go into Israel. They're concerned, well, what if that repeats itself, right? There's always going to be people who sin. So we're just going to go around in circles forever. So here too, according to Orach Chaim, that is a concern of Noach, and therefore God says it right away. This is going to be my brit with you, that this is not going to happen again. He doesn't give him the symbol yet, that's the sign of the rainbow, etc. Okay. The second part, right? So the second part is pretty famous Rashi. So again, we'll see what Rashi says. It's famous, and then you're going to tell me why he says it. Now, by the way, that's sort of an unfair question on my part, because you may have a hard time figuring it out. Not because simply because you need a larger amount of information. But I'm going to try it anyway. And it could be that one of you is aware or prepared and whatever. So anyways, Rashi says, Atov vanecha, on the last Rashi on that verse, Atov vanecha v'ishtecha, hanashim levad v'nashim levad, mekan shnesru b'tashmish hamita. Okay, so that the men were to go alone, right? And the women were to go alone, right? What does that actually mean? How much separation is there? Is not clear, right? All it's talking about is entering the boat, right? We didn't read about walls or mechitza, so we don't know how much, if any, interaction there is between the men and the women. But says Rashi, what's clear, and the main purpose of this is from here we learn that they were forbidden having sexual relations. And Rashi later on, I don't know why he says that they're not here. He says the idea, it's on Chaf Pasuk something. It's Zion. However, the next time this is mentioned, here, that doesn't matter. Yeah. Pasuk Zion, Chaf Zion, Perak Chaf Pasuk Zion. So he says the same thing again, right, based on a very similar verse. But there he gives an explanation. Why were they forbidden? He says there, Mipnei sha'olam sharui b'tzar, that the world um, is filled with pain, right? That the idea is when there's tremendous pain among people, then you shouldn't be engaged in procreation, really in sexual relations. And we have a similar idea by Yosef during the famine in Egypt, right? Similar limud, similar learning is made based on psukim there. So that's the famous Rashi. But my question to you is, why does Rashi say that? Okay, and I mean, I'm not looking for the obvious. The obvious is that it says the men first and then the women after that. So yes, that's true. That's part of the equation. But a more important part of the equation is not there. What's the more important part of the equation? Right. This would be those of you who remember my Rashi question sheet. This would be on the Rashi question sheet. Typical questions was questions that Rashi often asks. What is wrong with this verse? Okay, so I'll give you a hint. I'll tell you where else to look, if I can find it.
Is it that the people are listed differently somewhere else?
Good, yeah. So how would you expect them to be listed?
You and your wife and your sons and their wives.
Perfect. Exactly. Very good, Katya. So you did it without even seeing it. Right. Excellent. You figured out which the problem should be. Yafeh. Okay. So if you want to, you can take a look in Perek Chet, Pasuk. Where'd it go? Pasuk Tet Zion. And God commands Noah when they're going to leave the ark. He says, Semen ateva ata ve'ishtecha uvanecha u'meshevanecha itach. Right? So exactly as Katya said, right? And completely different than here, right? The standard, by the way, in the story is going to be what we just saw. And not just now, what we saw in our verse, right? That it's Noah and his sons, his wife, and his daughters-in-law. Incidentally, we'll get to it in the Perek where God commands Noah to go out this way. It's interesting that they don't go out that way, right? So we'll talk about that. They go out, men and women separately. I mean, they're too Haredi, they're too frum. They didn't want to, it's a problem. Can't do that. Pasnisht in Yiddish say it's not appropriate. Right? They say that. I mean, there's this old joke about that God has two things on the menu for the tzaddikim in the future. There's what's called a shor abor, this giant ox, and there's also the leviathan, right? This giant fish. So the question is, why is there two? And the answer is some people won't trust the kashrut on the meat. So anyway, so okay. So what are we holding? We are in. I want to see that Ramban still. But we're not there yet. Okay, so pasuk. Okay, pasuk yud tet. Right. So this is where the Ramban is. ומכל החי מכל בשר, שניים מכל תביא אל התיבה לחיות, איתך זכר ונקבה יהיו. Okay, so from all the living, from all flesh, two from each bring to the ark, to preserve life with you, right? Or to live with you, really. They should be male and female, right? But leaving nothing to chance. So, in other words, there's no room for mistakes, right? Everyone has to have two. One has to be a male, one has to be a female, right? There's really the kosher animals have room for mistakes. You have 7, right? But when it comes to everything else, there's no room, right? If you mess up with one animal, you've lost the whole species. Now let's take a quick look at the Ramban on Yutet. Right, he says, if you have it, please look inside. Well, we'll actually skip the first couple lines, where essentially he says there's a ton of animals in the world, right? Vehine, I don't know if you can find the place in the Rambam. Vehine yitztarech lahavi bikulam sheyolidu kamotam. וכאשר תאסוף לכולם ומאכל אשר יאכל לשנה תמימה, לא תאכיל אותו התיבה הזאת ולא 10 כי יוצא בה. So the Ramban, not only do you have to bring all the animals, but you also have to bring food enough for a year, right? And that's not even to mention Rashi's point about waste products. Now maybe you could just throw them out into the ocean, right? Presumably, I think that would make more sense if it's feasible. I don't know the technology. The Ramban doesn't talk about that. Maybe it's not concerned, but because you don't need to, even without that, just the food and the animals alone would be, says the Ramban, would require 10 ships like this, right? So what do you do with that? So there's an obvious answer, right? You're dealing with God, right? So God can do these things, right? It doesn't have to fit, right? When we buy a shoe, it has to fit. But that's not the way it works with God. So he says, that's what the Ramban says. He says, Aval hayan nes, hechzik muat et hamiruba. There was a miracle and a small place fit a large group, right? That's a phrase, by the way, that he borrows from elsewhere. Anybody knows where that's from? Muat machzik et hamiruba. Rachel, yeah?
Come up by like the people in the base of Mikdash that they
That's
all
right.
all about.
Exactly. That's where it's mentioned from the Nisim and the Beit HaMikdash. There was room for everybody, even though it wasn't enough. It wasn't large enough, right? It's interesting because a rabbi was speaking this Shabbat about how the third Beit HaMikdash is going to be much larger because it's got to fit more people. Maybe yes, maybe not. I don't know. So then the Ramban asks an interesting question. He says, "V'im tomar yasenu ktana v'yismol chalanes." So says the Ramban, so if anyway, right, and this might be addressing this question about the third Beit HaMikdash, so make it, why be matriach Noach? Why have Noach work so hard, right? If you can have a small boat miraculously expand or fit everything that needs to be on board, so make it smaller, right? So he says, Ra Hashem Yitbarach lasot gedola kedei shiru ota bnei doro v'yitma'u ba v'yisaphu alav v'yidavu b'inyan hamabul v'kinus ha'beima v'chaya v'of letocha ulai yasu tshuva. So says the Ramban, it was in order to make an impression on the people, right? If Noach is making a motorboat, and he's going to put all the animals on the motorboat, right? So it doesn't make a big impression, And it's like, it's funny. It's a little motorboat that can take all the animals on, right? But if he is building this really big ship, especially for their time, right, bigger than anything they've seen, it's before Migdal Bavel, so it's presumably by far the largest structure that had ever been built, right? So this is a spectacle, and not only that, right? He's going to be taking all these animals in, right? So it's the whole thing, and it's going to create a lot of commotion. Says the Ramban, that's what God wants. But he gives a second answer, which I think is more fundamental. And he says, "Ve'od asauto gdola lema'et benes." He made it big in order to minimize the miracle. Kiken adech bechol nisim shebetorah, because that's the way of all the miracles in the Torah, or b'nevi'im, the prophets, la'asot kol asher biyad adam la'asot, that a person has to do everything they can possibly do. V'ashar yeh b'dei shamayim, and the rest is up to God. Right? There's the Rambam speaks about this, the idea that God is not happy to do miracles because it forces people to fall in line. It breaks their free will. So therefore, there's a need for miracles for different reasons. According to the Rambam, it's always functional. Most Mefarshim would disagree and would say sometimes that it's to build faith, or in this case, to try to create faith. Nevertheless, it can never be overwhelming, right? So therefore, there always has to be a rational human element to whatever miracles are made to happen, right? The famous example for that is with Elisha, when there's this woman who's starving, right? And he tells her, give me whatever oil and dough you have, give it to me, and we'll work with that, right? You have to work with something. So that's the Ramban's second answer over there. There's a very interesting Netziv, by the way, the Emek Davar, of Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, who says that Mina and Mineu, and he says it in the creation story as well, means something different than most Mefarshim. Right? We say according to their species. So normally people understand that they shouldn't intermingle. That's what it means. The Netziv says no. It's almost sort of a evolutionary biology, that there are early species that will develop into many other species. I'm not sure if I have the right terminology, but you understand what I'm saying, right? So says the Netziv, the Ramban is speaking about nature the way we have it, where there's tons of species. But it's not at all clear that that was the case in the time of Noach. That's what the Netziv says, and that would make it not a miracle at all, right? Whenever you have a miracle that's not mentioned in the Torah that you have to figure out on your own, you have to ask why the Torah doesn't tell us. Right? As the Torah presents it as if the animals are going to fit. Right? It doesn't say, and there was a miracle and they all fit, which presumably the Torah would want to tell us. I think that strengthens the Netziv's approach, even if it's very original and not in the beaten track. Okay. Something I want to say, but I don't remember. So, okay. We will finish by 9:30. So we have a couple more psukim. Ma'of leminehu, ומן הבהמה למינה מכל רמס האדמה למינהו שניים מכל יבוא אליך לחיות. So from the birds, according to their species, from the domesticable animals according to its species, from all the crawling things of the ground according to its species, two from all will come to you to live, right? So Mefarshim talk about, in the previous verses is Tavi, here it says Yavo, if we get a chance, Rashi will deal with that later, in the next parak. ואתה קח לך מכל מאכל אשר יהיה אכל, ואספת אליך והיה לך להם, ולהם לא אוכלה. And you take for yourself from every food that is eaten, and you should gather for yourself. You should gather it for yourself, and it will be for you and for them for food. Okay, and then finally, the thing I wanted to mention is, what about fish? We've spoken about fish before, right? Were fish killed or not killed? I mean, it doesn't seem like there's any room for them on the boat. On the other hand, there's discussion about some people hanging, right? Og Melcha Bashan, right? For example, and Midrash, that he's hanging he's a freeloader on the ark, right? He's hanging on to the top, right? Because the danger is not getting wet, the danger is drowning. So if he's on the top, right? I mean, it's pretty uncomfortable, but granted, there's the Gafrit, the what do you call it? The brimstone. Maybe it doesn't touch the ark. I don't know, because brimstone presumably would burn through its gopher. So in any case, unclear. The Ebenezer seems to say that the fish were also destroyed. That's what he seems to say. Based on kol basar, by the way, right? That would make sense, right? Because we see fish being called basar. Certainly, they're different than plant life. They're closer to animals than they are to plants. So it's an interesting question. And then finally, in Pasuk Chaf Bet, V'yas Noach kol asher tziva oto Elohim ken asa. They all went to the Kinneret. Who? Zelda? Who went to the Kinneret? The fish. Okay, thanks. The Seder, yeah. I guess the big question is, was there a plan to destroy them as well, or were they somehow better, right? It's interesting because the idea that animals became immoral in having relations with not their species. So is that all the animals? Right. If you remember, those of you with me in Bereshit, there was basically two approaches to the destruction of the animals. One is that the animals became immoral, or two is simply that the only reason for their existence was for man's needs, right? Even indirectly, right? Creating an ecosystem, whatever it is. So the second approach is a lot easier, I think, personally, to explain what happens to the animals. Right, and therefore it's secondary, right? Which animals die, which don't die. Presumably, the issue with saving the animals is more for Noach than it is for the animals. That, as some have suggested, that it's teaching him how to be concerned for others and to do chesed, right? That Noach, as opposed to Abraham, is very limited in that direction. Okay. Anyways, Pasuk Chavet v'yas Noach kechol asher tzivah Elohim ken asa, and Noach did like everything that God commanded him, so did he do. Right. So it's an interesting phrase, and it's a phrase that we see happening in a few places. And the Ramban speaks to that. I mean, others also speak to what's being referred to, right? It doesn't seem like he's done much yet, right? Certainly, the main action is going to start in the next parak, starting Pasuk Aleph, right? God commands him at that point to go into the ark. So what could he have done? So the Ramban tells us what he could have done, which is to listen to all the commands up until now, which is essentially what the Ramban says. Take a quick look over there. The Ramban says, "V'yas Noach kol asher tziva Elokim Sha'asa et hateva v'asaf ha'machal. Right? What were the basic commandments? To make the ship and to gather the food, right? He's not gathering the animals yet. That's going to be the next things, but those things he could have done. V'derech ha'katuv lemor v'yas v'chen asa. And says the Ramban, it's the way of Tanakh, it's the way of Psukim to use this phrase. He did, and so did he do. Levaer ki lo hipil davar mikol asher tziva. To explain that he did not drop anything that that God commanded. And as every detail that was commanded was done, right? In our case, in terms of the measurements, in terms of the structure of the ark, and so on and so forth, the building materials, right? All of that was done according to what God said. Okay, so I think we are done with the psukim that we wanted to cover this week. Any comments, questions? We finished
I
2
had a
minutes early.
question really
Yeah, go
fast
for it.
about the water
Yeah,
thing. Isn't there a
yeah,
commentary that also says like the water was like burning hot and like feel like that
yeah.
would probably kill all the fish and stuff? Is that
Right.
the
Yeah, so that's good. That's a good point. That I mean, we can see that again we talked about the brimstone. What's brimstone? It's fire from the heavens, sort of like volcanic matter going into the ocean. So yeah, that would be pretty deadly. The issue with the fish and just on a practical level is where would Noach have put them, right? We don't read about fish tanks, and nor do we read about him gathering fish. So that's why Zelda presented a midrash. I assume it's a midrash. They all went to the Kinneret, which was somehow protected. I mean, you have to say that the fish somehow survived, and the flood, even with the burning water, was such that it didn't destroy everything in its way. As I said, even the ark, right? You could say there's a miracle with the ark that it didn't burn even though it was brimstone. But then you'd have to invoke the same idea with the fish, or you would be able to invoke the same idea with the fish. In any case, it's an interesting quandary. The Torah seems to want to leave it in terms of a fairly large description, not go into all of the details in terms of what happened. It goes to more details than one might have thought, given the stage in history that we're in, but it also leaves a lot of things that are not so clear. Okay. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you all next week. Be well.
Thank you. Bye.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.